Revenge with Karen.
I'm sorry, what did you just cut? I asked, already knowing the answer. Kyle, our shiny new VP of Revenue, didn't even look up from his MacBook. His fingers danced over the trackpad like he was auditioning for a tech startup ballet, eyes glazed with self-satisfaction. The stewardship program, he said, sipping from a black tumbler that probably cost more than my weekly grocery bill. The cost-benefit analysis just doesn't support it. No hard ROI. Blinked just once, slowly. That program was a line item in my budget, $200K annually, for customized stewardship reports sent to our top-tier sponsors. Not just any sponsors. I'm talking about Arcline Biomed, the pharmaceutical juggernaut dropping $60 million a year into our ecosystem. That money didn't trickle in, it poured. And it poured because I made sure they felt seen, informed, essential. Those reports weren't fluff. They were the reason Arcline's SVP once told me over lunch, "You're the only vendor who knows how we think before we think it." But Kyle saw a PDF with some charts and called it decoration. I'd seen men like him before. MBA slick, PowerPoint fluent, allergic to nuance. He had been with us for 3 weeks and already labeled my department non-revenue generating. Which was ironic. Considering I was the one who had brought in the flagship deal, he now strutted around pretending to manage. "We're entering a strategic realignment," he continued, like he was reading off a napkin from a corporate happy hour. "Trimming fat so we can scale lean." Trim fat. I'd heard that before. It's corporate code for, "We don't understand what you do, so we're going to cut it and hope for the best." So, to clarify, I said calmly, because rage would only feed him, eliminated the personalized stewardship deliverables for our top sponsors, including Arcline. He finally looked at me, smiled, like I was being dramatic. "I'm sure they'll survive without a pretty PDF." A pretty PDF. That pretty PDF was contractually obligated under a clause I had negotiated 3 years ago. A clause buried in the appendix of an appendix of the MOU renewal. It stated, in deliberately boring legal language, that Arcline required annual strategic stewardship documentation customized to their board's review format. Noncompliance would void automatic renewal and trigger a 90-day review window with no obligation to notify us until the end of the fiscal year. In other words, if we didn't send the report, they didn't have to renew, and they didn't even have to tell us they weren't planning to. But Kyle didn't ask. He didn't read. He didn't know. Now he'd killed the one thing standing between us and a silent $60 million exit. "Noted," I said. My voice was ice on granite. Back at my desk, I opened the contract archive. I pulled up the Arcline file, paged to the clause, and screen captured it. Then I opened a secure folder in my private drive, labeled it insurance, dated it, annotated it. Then I opened a new document titled Arcline Stewardship Clause Internal Advisory. That document, I wrote the following. March 6th. VP of Revenue Kyle Jensen has formally eliminated the stewardship reporting budget, effectively nullifying our contractual compliance with Arcline's renewal clause. This memo serves as internal documentation of forewarning should renewal be declined or revenue impacted. I sent the memo to legal. BCC-ed myself. No drama. No subject line in all caps. Just a quiet breadcrumb. After that, I stopped plugging Kyle's holes. I stopped reminding his analysts to include historical context in the sponsor metrics. I stopped forwarding QBR notes. I stopped asking if he wanted a readout on Arcline's mid-year personnel reshuffle, one that had put a notorious cost cutter in charge of vendor management. I did my job. I stayed in my lane, and I let the lane end where he drew the new line. But I didn't forget. I kept checking Arcline's investor site. Every week, quietly. Because that clause was now a ticking bomb, and Kyle had just cut the wire keeping it stable. The email hit my inbox at 7:03 a.m., subject line, org chart realignment, effective immediately. No greeting, no explanation. Just a link to a PowerPoint deck with pixelated boxes and bastardized flowcharts, like a back-alley Excel doc got drunk and tried to play HR. My name had been demoted to a lonely corner box labeled Strategic Advisor, consultative only. No team, no direct reports, no dotted lines, not even a courtesy bubble connected to the Arcline portfolio I built from the damn ground up. I stared at the slide for a long time, longer than I should have. The fluorescent lights in my home office buzzed like they were trying to warn me in Morse code. Then the kicker came. Internal calendar invite. Sponsor reporting alignment owner, Jake W. Jake, 24, fresh out of undergrad. Still called his Google Sheets spreadsheets like they were made of actual paper. I clicked into his LinkedIn. 2 years of data entry for a pet insurance startup. His pinned post was a selfie in front of the building on his first day at our company, captioned "Time to make it rain briefcase chart." I didn't scream. I didn't send a single email. I just got up, made a cup of coffee that tasted like defeat, and returned to my desk. I opened our sponsor compliance calendar and methodically updated every single item with status flags. Not for Kyle, not for Jake, for me. Arcline Q1 materials delivered. Arcline Q2 stewardship prep. Cancelled budget cut. Arcline clause 7.3. At risk notify legal if renewal language shifts. I then exported everything. Timestamped PDFs. Screenshots. Archive copies on an encrypted thumb drive that now lives in my sock drawer behind a row of untouched birthday cards. That was the day I stopped being the fixer. You see, before Kyle showed up, my job wasn't just to manage partnerships, it was to protect them. When timelines slipped, or vendor liaisons ghosted us, or a VP forgot to show up to a QBR, I was the one behind the curtain, fixing the mess quietly before it reached the surface. I chased down missing bios at midnight, rewritten biosensor summaries over weekends, once even drove 2 hours to hand-deliver a correction to an Arcline board packet when FedEx botched the shipment. But now, that was no longer my lane. I had been invited to contribute insights when requested, which was corporate speak for sit in the corner until we need a scapegoat or a miracle. So I became something else. Not a ghost, not a saboteur, just absent. I let Jake send his fluffy engagement decks with outdated metrics. I watched his Excel formulas break without offering a word. I saw him pull pipeline charts from the CRM without adjusting for sponsor segmentation, Arcline included, and said nothing. I wasn't bitter. I was done. Let them believe Arcline was fine. Let Kyle float on his bloated KPIs and his buzzword bonfire of a roadmap. Let legal remain uninformed. I was no longer the glue. I was the documentation. And every single week I updated the file labeled Arcline Fallout Audit Trail. I tracked missed calls, ignored follow-ups, shifts in Arcline's public language. At first, it was subtle, a missing logo on their partner highlights page. Then the deletion of a hyperlink that once led to our joint initiatives. Jake didn't notice. Kyle didn't care. But I noticed, because when a client like Arcline goes quiet, it's not silence. It's thunder pulling in behind a wall of clouds. And I knew that once the lightning hit, it wouldn't be Jake holding the umbrella. It would be me, sitting there with every receipt, every ignored memo, every time-stamped clue, and Kyle wouldn't even see it coming, because he never read the fine print. Kyle clicked to the next slide in his board presentation, smug little twitch tugging at the corner of his mouth, like he'd just farted in a Tesla showroom and expected applause. Quarter-over-quarter sponsor engagement is up 19.3%, he declared, his voice all bravado and bullet points. We're seeing a healthy uptick in warm leads, and our pipeline for Q4 is the strongest it's ever been. Didn't mention that sponsor engagement included 3 likes on a LinkedIn post from a medical intern, and a webinar Arcline never even attended. He didn't mention that the warm leads were mostly tire kickers who downloaded one white paper and ghosted the follow-up emails. And the Q4 pipeline, it was a spreadsheet held together with assumptions and blind optimism, color-coded in the kind of green only seen in monopoly money and marketing hallucinations. Board nodded, a few even smiled. Kyle basked in it like a lizard on a sun lamp. No one asked about Arcline, and why would they? According to Kyle, everything was up and to the right. Except it wasn't. I sat at the edge of the Zoom call, muted, camera off, wearing pajama pants and a face like granite. My role, strategic advisor, didn't merit screen time. I was a calendar invite formality, a leftover name on the distribution list. But I was still watching. Kyle didn't mention that Arcline hadn't replied to a single email in 27 days. Not to Jake's hastily cobbled check-in deck. Not to Kyle's thought leadership memo. Not even to the personal note he'd sent with a Starbucks gift card link. Jake had pinged me in Slack once, a little desperate. Hey, just checking, was Arcline always this quiet? I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a fresh tab and went to Arcline's investor relations page. Quarterly update. Just posted. Buried in the footnotes, a sentence that meant nothing to anyone who didn't know what to look for. Partnership accountability benchmarks updated to reflect revised stewardship expectations for FY25. That was it. No name, no dates, no fireworks, but to me, it was a siren blaring from the depths of a mine shaft. They had rewritten the clause. It meant the clock was ticking. They hadn't cut us yet. They were preparing the surface for a clean break. The new clause gave them legal daylight to exit without triggering breach protocols. No lawsuits, no noise, just a cold, corporate goodbye, and Kyle, he was too busy polishing his buzzwords to notice the iceberg. That week, he shared an internal update. A slide deck titled, Revenue Renaissance, Our Next Chapter. He used phrases like sponsor synergies, value amplification, and my personal favorite, ecosystemic trust capital. Arkline was mentioned exactly once, a quote from a year-old testimonial pasted next to a stock photo of a handshake. The rest of the company ate it up. I didn't. I started collecting. Every time Arkline failed to reply, logged. Every time Jake messaged me confused and nervous, screenshot. Every time Kyle mentioned them in past tense praise, clipped and dated. I built a folder labeled Executive Discrepancies. And then added the clause revision from Arkline's site, screenshotted, timestamped, cross-referenced with the original MOU. It was surgical, precise. Not vindictive, just complete. Kyle thought he was building a cathedral out of quarterly metrics. I was documenting the termites in the foundation. Because when it all collapsed, and it would, the board wouldn't care about his pipeline fantasies. They'd care about what we missed, and I would have every answer, in black and white. Meanwhile, I watched Kyle walk into every meeting with the confidence of a man who thinks a fire alarm is just background music. He had no idea he was already standing in smoke. The calendar notification came and went like a whisper in an abandoned house. Arkline QBR 10 o'clock a.m., recurring, except no one joined. No dial-in. No email reschedule. No LinkedIn excuse about family emergencies or overlapping travel. Just nothing. That silence rang louder than any missed deadline I'd ever heard. I stared at the empty Zoom square, watched the little spinning icon wait patiently for participants that weren't coming. I let it time out. Then I opened the QBR folder. Empty. No prep docs, no agenda, no Jake, no Kyle, and I knew they weren't late, they weren't forgetful, they were done. The next morning, legal pinged me quietly like a footstep behind your back. Hey, have you seen a renewal confirmation or QBR notes from Arkline? Their countersigned NDA for FY25 hasn't come through. Translation, they're ghosting us. I typed out a reply, then deleted it. Instead, I just forwarded them a single file, the original MOU with the stewardship clause highlighted in yellow. I added no context. None was needed. Meanwhile, Kyle was in what I can only describe as a corporate tailspin disguised as a proactive adjustment. He sent a flurry of emails. A catch-up deck riddled with grammatical errors and misaligned graphs. A half-hearted offer to do a fireside sync next week. He copied legal. He copied comms. He even tagged our CEO in one message like Arkline would somehow be impressed we involved the top brass. But me, still benched, still ignored, still consultative. Kyle didn't ask for help, didn't ask for history, didn't even ask what stewardship meant in the context of that clause. Because Kyle didn't know how to ask questions, only how to issue declarations. During the weekly exec review, the CEO, a man who wore the same black fleece vest every day like it was armor, casually asked, anything we need to flag with Arkline? Kyle, slick as an oil spill, grinned like a prom king. They're solid, just a bit slow on scheduling, probably travel-related. We're on it. I watched from the far corner of the Zoom tile grid. He never said my name, never acknowledged the hole under his feet. After the meeting, I opened the MOU again. Scrolled, slowly. There it was. Clause 7.3. Partner shall provide annual stewardship brief no later than end of Q2 each fiscal year, in format outlined by Appendix C. Failure to provide constitutes breach of proactive obligation and voids renewal auto-execution. Appendix C was written by me. It included specific formats for reporting that Kyle's team hadn't even glanced at. The deadline had passed 3 weeks ago. The clause was untouched, forgotten, dead silent, and now so was Arkline. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled through my nose. Not satisfaction, not anger, just the cold precision of a meteorologist reading a radar. The storm was no longer coming. It was here, and Kyle, he was still outside, grinning at clouds and calling it sunshine. The moment hit me on a Tuesday morning so still it felt like the air had been vacuum sealed. I wasn't even looking for it, just performing my usual ritual. Black coffee, inbox purge, and a sweep of Arcline's public disclosures. I clicked into their strategic partnerships tab and scrolled out of habit, like a hunter checking familiar tracks in fresh snow. And there it was. One name gone, one name added. Where we used to sit front and center with a glowing blurb about long-term data integration trust was now replaced with a bolded logo, Nexvia Tech, our rival. A fast-talking, cash-burning biotech platform we'd laughed off a year ago as unstable. Too new, too noisy. Now listed as Arcline's lead integration partner. No announcement, no press release, just a cold, clean swap. I didn't panic, I didn't even blink. I just opened my local archive, created a new folder titled Defection Initiated, and dragged in a screenshot of the updated partner page, timestamp and all. The silence that followed wasn't just absence. It was intentional. No cancellation notice. No formal goodbye. Just a digital throat slit in the middle of the night. By mid-afternoon, I got the Slack message from Jake. It was tentative, full of the kind of punctuation that signals panic hiding behind politeness. Hey, random question. Was I ever supposed to send Arcline something, like a report or briefing? I don't think I ever got anything on that. I stared at his message for a solid minute, weighing the cost of saying anything at all. Then I closed the chat window. Didn't deserve the fury I'd have to suppress. He was a kid thrown into a bare pit, while the man who pushed him in held a microphone and bragged about his talent pipeline. Instead, I added a line to my master file. May 9 junior analyst confirms no instructions provided for Arcline stewardship brief. Clause 7.3 breached without mitigation. Legal not informed. I highlighted it in red. I opened my company inbox and searched for every email from Kyle in the past 90 days that mentioned Arcline. I filtered for attachments. Only 2 files. Neither of them contained stewardship summaries. Neither of them were in the format required by Appendix C. Then I did the same search in Slack. Kyle had once dropped a message in a project channel that read, "Let's not overthink Arcline. They're loyal and locked." I screenshotted it, saved it, because loyalty in partnerships isn't a default setting. It's a result. And Kyle had replaced precision with arrogance, mistaking inertia for allegiance. I remembered a dinner I once had with the Arcline team. Their VP of Ops had leaned over a half-finished ribeye and told me, "We stay where we're understood." Not tolerated, understood. Kyle never understood them. Hell, he barely acknowledged them. Now they were gone. And no one had the decency to tell us, because technically, I didn't have to. I checked our CRM. The deal record still showed auto-renew in progress. I chuckled, just once, bitter. The system thought they were still ours. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling like it held the stars of every decision I hadn't made. This wasn't some corporate fumble. This was a textbook execution. Quiet, surgical, deliberate. And when the collapse finally reached the surface, Kyle stood in front of the board trying to explain how a $60 million anchor client vanished without a sound. I wouldn't need to raise my voice. I'd just need to open a folder, because the receipts were already alphabetized, and the blade had already been dropped. The all-hands invite dropped into calendars like a grenade. Mandatory company update, 3:00 p.m. No agenda, no prep docs. Just a big red block that made every Slack channel light up with speculation. At 3:00 sharp, the Zoom tiles flickered to life. Faces frozen in half-smiles, people fidgeting with mugs, pretending they weren't terrified. Kyle appeared dead center, shirt collar tight enough to strangle, voice pitched higher than usual. "Team," he began, the word cracking like dry wood. "We've encountered a market shift." He stumbled through a jargon fog, but the truth came out fast. Arcline Biomed, our $60 million flagship sponsor, had officially defected. A curt notice filed through their legal counsel. Transition of partnership obligations effective immediately. That was the language. Cold, clinical, and final. Slack detonated. Threads filled with, "And wait, what are we sure?" Emails began bouncing around like stray bullets. Finance tried to model the cash impact. Legal was already drafting potential litigation scenarios. Anyone with eyes knew there was no case. They had the clause, and we'd broken it. Kyle's forehead glistened under the LED ring light. He muttered something about external market pressures and pricing alignment with evolving vendor ecosystems. No one bought it. The CFO cut him off mid-sentence, voice flat and merciless. "Kyle, we had a renewal clause. Was it met?" Kyle blinked, hesitated, then tried to bulldoze forward, talking about global inflationary headwinds. The CEO, who had been silent until then, leaned forward. His voice carried the kind of weight that silences entire companies. "Kyle, answer the question." Kyle stammered. "Well, the reporting function was deprioritized in Q1 for resource optimization, but I muted my mic, leaned back in my chair, and felt a strange, steady calm settle in. This was the moment I'd seen coming for months. The storm was no longer on the horizon. It was in the room, ripping drywall off the studs. People glanced at each other in their little digital squares, the way passengers do when they realize the turbulence isn't just turbulence. The board was looped in within the hour. A late-night emergency call. The kind with shaky connections and clipped voices, where every word costs reputation and every silence costs money. Kyle presented a deck, 30 slides of hollow jargon and rainbow graphs. No answers, just camouflage. Talked about pipeline velocity, competitive realignments, externalized churn factors. The chair of the board finally asked Kyle, did we or did we not deliver what was required under Arcline's renewal protocol? Kyle opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. We may have underinvested in certain areas. Translation, we cut the wrong thing and I never noticed until the bomb went off. The CEO's face was carved from stone. And me? I sat there in silence, laptop closed, archive folder glowing like a loaded gun in my desk drawer. I didn't need to jump in. Not yet, because the truth wasn't rushing anywhere. It was already here, and it was about to bury him alive. The boardroom was quiet in that fake, choking way silence gets when no one wants to be the first to bleed. Half the faces were piped in remotely, mahogany offices in the background, designer lamps glowing behind expressions carved in stone. Rest sat shoulder to shoulder at the long glass table, staring down Kyle like he'd just thrown a lit match into a grain silo. He cleared his throat. Again. "Thank you all for joining on such short notice," he began, clicking to slide one of his sacred deck. Title, Arcline Exit Strategic Contextualization. I almost laughed. Slide 2 was a SWOT analysis. Slide 3 quoted something from Harvard Business Review. Slide 4 was a bar chart comparing Q1 sponsor sentiment across verticals, none of which were Arcline. By slide 7, the chair of the board, Marla, with the immovable bun and the $200,000 stare, interlaced her fingers and asked flatly, "Was the exit a surprise to you, Kyle?" Kyle adjusted his glasses, a tick he hadn't needed until this week. "Well, it wasn't, technically, an exit," he said. "It's more of a reallocation of their vendor ecosystem based on macroeconomic shifts." "Was it a surprise?" she repeated, more ice than inquiry. Kyle paused. Yes, there it was. The sound of a man stepping into his own grave. I watched as he tried to pivot, mumbling about industry churn and post-pandemic spend suppression, but the room had already turned. Eyes narrowed. Fingers tapped pens against pads. Finally, the CEO turned his head slowly, like it pained him to do it. He looked directly at me. "You used to lead the Arcline account," he said. "Do you have any insight into what happened?" My heart didn't race. My palms didn't sweat. I had practiced this moment for months without knowing it. "Yes," I said, reaching into my bag with the calm of a surgeon prepping for incision. I opened my laptop, the screen already queued. One document, one line. Arcline's updated public statement from their investor page. "Due to unmet obligations tied to annual stewardship documentation, we have elected to move forward with a more aligned integration partner." I didn't elaborate, didn't editorialize. Just read it out loud and turn the laptop to face them. A quiet inhale swept the room. The CEO's eyes locked on the text like it was a confession scrawled in blood. "Stewardship documentation," Marla repeated. "It sounds contractual." "It was," I said simply. Another board member, a finance guy with a Wall Street jawline, leaned forward. "Was that obligation missed?" I looked directly at Kyle. "Yes." Kyle looked like he'd swallowed a thumbtack. "It was deprioritized," he blurted. "The program didn't show clear ROI. Did you know it was required for renewal?" the CEO asked. Kyle opened his mouth, then closed it. That's when the CEO finally did it. Reached across the table slowly, picked up his laptop, and pushed it toward Kyle without a word. Like he couldn't bear to hold it anymore. All eyes shifted. No one moved, because this wasn't a conversation anymore. It was an autopsy. And Kyle was the body. The CEO took the laptop like it had weight, not just plastic and metal, but guilt and negligence baked into its shell. He pulled it closer, clicked, scrolled. His finger hovered over the trackpad like it didn't trust the surface beneath it. I watched him trace the text, Clause 7.3, his brow tightening with every line. The clause was plain, unambiguous and damning. Partner shall provide annual stewardship brief no later than end of Q2 each fiscal year, in format outlined by Appendix C. Failure to comply shall be considered a breach of proactive obligations, voiding automatic renewal terms. No flowery language, no gray area, just cold legal concrete. He kept scrolling. Appendix C, a format template I'd written myself, tailored with Arcline's own board documentation style, quarterly performance benchmarks, integration metrics, future value assessments. The clause had been signed 3 years ago. It hadn't changed, but the silence from Arcline had. And now the silence from the room matched it, dense, uncomfortable, and sharp. CEO closed the laptop gently, like slamming it would detonate something. Then, without looking up, he pushed it across the table to Kyle. Not fast, not dramatic, just rejection, a motion of transfer, responsibility offloaded. Kyle didn't reach for it. He just stared at it like it might bite him. Marla's eyes narrowed. One of the outside directors scribbled something with such force his pen tore the page. From the far end of the table, VP of Legal leaned toward the CFO, whispering just loud enough to catch stray phrases. Breach exposure, fiduciary implication, gross process failure. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Kyle's face drained from boardroom beige to ICU gray. The CEO finally looked up, not at Kyle, at me. When did you become aware this clause was missed? My voice didn't tremble. 3 months ago. He blinked once. Slowly. And did you raise it? I did. Writing, March 6th. Internal advisory memo sent to legal, attached with a compliance note. I also documented it in our stewardship system before my reassignment. Screenshots available. He nodded once. No further questions. Kyle tried to recover, reaching for words like they were floating just out of reach. There was no intent to breach. Resources were shifted. Reporting was deprioritized in favor of pipeline acceleration. Arla cut him off with a single raised hand. Intent isn't the issue, she said coolly. Execution is. The CFO was already tapping on his tablet, probably modeling revenue damage and stakeholder fallout. I glanced at Kyle one last time. He looked like a man trying to solve a puzzle made of knives. And for the first time since this all began, I allowed myself the faintest flicker of satisfaction. Not because I wanted him destroyed, because he had ignored the map, torched the compass, and driven the bus off a cliff, while smirking at everyone who warned him about the turn. I had warned him, and now the silence had spoken for me. I stood up, slowly, no theatrics, no fire in my voice. I wasn't there to gloat, and I wasn't there to rage. I was there because someone had to read the black and white truth out loud, while everyone else kept pretending it was written in invisible ink. If it helps, I said evenly, I can walk the board through the timeline of what was cut, by whom, and when. I let the sentence breathe. The pause wasn't for drama, it was for emphasis. Because the facts didn't need embellishment. They just needed to be spoken by someone who hadn't built their career on pretending metrics were reality. Kyle squirmed like someone had tied a garden hose around his chest. I have the memo dated March 6th, I continued, flagging the stewardship clause as high risk. It was sent to legal and CC'd to revenue ops. I also have Slack logs from February, Jake asking about Arcline's deliverables. And I have screenshots of the MOU, along with Arcline's updated partner profile and investor statement. The room shifted, almost imperceptibly, like a tectonic plate sliding into place beneath the conference table. No one asked to see the receipts. They knew I had them. Board chair turned to legal. We'll need a full risk mitigation review. Immediately, legal just nodded, already tapping notes into a secure tablet. That's when Kyle made his final, pitiful move. Look, I understand mistakes were made, but I was operating under the guidance. The CEO's voice cut through the air like a snapped violin string. You've done enough. Silence. No one defended him, not legal, not finance. Not even the comms director. Once called him a visionary during a company retreat. I sat back down, slowly, tucked my badge into a leather folder like a surgeon folding away a scalpel. Then I looked up, voice steady. As of now, I said, I'm available for independent advisory. Rate starts at $600 per hour. I didn't wait for their approval. I didn't need it. That's how it ends for people like Kyle, not with a bang, but with a clause. As I packed up, I glanced at the projector screen one last time. There it was, Clause 7.3, highlighted, zoomed in, the language plain and deadly. Failure to provide constitutes breach of proactive obligation and voids renewal auto-execution. Kyle stared at it like it was in another language. But it wasn't. It was English. It was binding. And it was the exact line that ended him. You're the real stars of the corporate jungle. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe, or I'll flick the switch on your old cubicle memories.